Well, according to some estimates, the fashion industry emits between 1 and 3.3 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide per year, meaning it contributes more to the climate crisis than the aviation and shipping industries combined. Making matters worse, it's believed that less than 1% of all clothing worldwide is recycled, a vicious cycle, then, of mass consumption and waste. So what can businesses and consumers do to diminish the impact on the planet? Well, for more, Livia Firth joins us for perspective. She's co-founder and creative director of EcoAge, a consulting agency specialized in integrated sustainability. Livia, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me. It's so great to be here. Bonjour. Tout le monde.
Bonjour. So you also founded the Green Carpet Challenge as well, and produced the Green Carpet Fashion Awards. Can you tell us what inspired you to create these initiatives and concretely what they aim to do?
Well, we created EcoAge 14 years ago. We started talking about sustainability when very few people or businesses were even considering it. So we saw the whole era of sustainability going from no one cared about to the CSR tick boxing in the business reports to today everyone wants to do sustainability and there is more greenwashing that you can handle. And fashion is a gigantic weapon of mass construction, if you want, because, you know, through fashion, you can tell stories across such a varied supply chain, because fashion is an all-encompassing industry. It starts from agriculture. So when you talk about deforestation, for example, you have fashion. When you talk about planetary boundaries, you have fashion. When you talk about slave labor, you get fashion. When you talk about, you know, the numbers you gave about pollution and carbon emissions is all about fashion. And when you consider the fact that we all get dressed every single day, it's not difficult to believe those figures and also it's not difficult to understand the power that we have as individuals to affect change through the clothes that we wear. Personally, my journey started when I went to Bangladesh for the first time in 2008, and I got into a factory, and what I saw changed my life forever, because there were so many women enslaved in this, you know, terrible, working under terrible conditions with no ventilation. There were bars at the windows. It looked like more a prison than a factory. And this was a few years before the Rana Plaza collapsed in 2013. And today, the situation is still exactly the same. And it's not only in Bangladesh, it's in so many countries around the world. And fashion is, you know, we have been divorced so much from the production cycle. And today, through fast fashion, we buy fast and furiously without even thinking about the consequences on people and planet.
So before we get to the consequences and how to maybe change things, Livia, I want to kind of set the limits of the terms that we're using. Things like green, sustainable, ethical, clean. We hear these words all the time. I feel like the more we hear them, the more the meaning is almost lost. Can you explain what exactly ethical and sustainable fashion means to you?
Well, first of all, if you look at, there is no legal definition of sustainable fashion. You're completely correct. But if you look at the dictionary of what sustainability means, is something that lasts in time. So first and foremost, sustainable fashion should be fashion that lasts in time. So clothes that we buy, quality clothes that we buy, and that last in our wardrobe for decades. Today, the situation is exactly the opposite. The clothes that we buy last in our wardrobe, according to some statistics, a maximum of 5 weeks before we turn them around and we throw them away. Ethical means that we need to wear clothes that have been manufactured by people with respect, that are treated with respect. And, you know, why do we value a seamstress in Paris in a completely different way that we will value a seamstress in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, or in Ethiopia, or in Turkey that are producing those clothes? But sadly, the reason why brands today produce in faraway countries is because they can, sometimes in the case of Rana Plaza, get away with murder and produce with, you know, paying not even a minimum wage in most cases.
In listening to you, especially your definition on sustainability, it almost sounds to me like sustainability and fashion is really a contradiction in terms. Because fashion, the industry produces clothing. The industry wouldn't exist, in my view, if people didn't have something to buy and renew regularly. Do you think that the business model can actually coexist in a viable way with the idea of sustainability?
No, actually, we wouldn't be here today talking about sustainable fashion if fast fashion didn't exist. Because fashion and sustainability are not an oxymoron, but fast fashion and sustainability are. And the problem is that in the last 30 years, this business model created by companies actually, I think the first company to ever create the fast fashion model was Zara, that is predicated on producing huge volume of clothes in a very, very fast time with incredibly cheap prices, so that they addicted us like sugar, basically. So we buy and discard, we buy and discard, we buy and discard. And they sold us this myth of democracy because, it's democratic to buy cheap clothes. But it's not the democracy of the people who produce them. So it's only the democracy of the privileged global north who can afford it to buy so fast and so furiously.
So that I feel like there is an appeal, though, for fast fashion to the extent that it is cheap and it gives people with a lower budget the opportunity to feel like they're buying clothing that's still fashionable. Do you think that an affordable, sustainable fashion is realistic? And even just to hinge off of that question as a second part of the question, the luxury industry, maybe it produces clothing that's not as cheaply produced. It has better working standards for its workers, but it also has, I'm sure, a carbon impact in the types of shipping and transport costs that it uses to ship luxury products to people globally.
But what are you talking about? The environmental tool of this cycle is fueled by the social side of it. Because this business model wouldn't be even possible unless you employed, which is not employment, but slave labor. So is it only made possible by using cheap labor? So the first solution, first and foremost, is if fast fashion companies had to pay a living wage to every single garment worker in their supply chain, they couldn't afford to produce those volumes. And therefore, you couldn't have the dumping in countries like Greenpeace published a report 3 days ago that demonstrated the volumes of dumping that the global north does in terms of clothing on the global south in countries like Ghana, for example, which is something that we covered in one of the Fashionscape episodes that I produced on circular economy. You have Kantamanto market where every month 50 million pieces of clothes arrive every month to be burned. And it's totally unsustainable. So to take a step back to what you were saying about affordability, maybe it's because I'm 52 years old and I was born and lived through my teens and early 20s before fast fashion even existed. We used to buy in a very, very different way. We used to save money when we found something that we really liked and buy it and keep it and store it and take care of it. I still have the majority of the clothes I had that I bought in my 20s.
Livia, perhaps as a last question, I wish we had more time, but as a last question, can you tell us, just for a little bit of optimism, what can consumers do to avoid greenwashing traps that you had mentioned earlier?
Well, first of all, feel that you have power, because the majority of us have been disempowered. So we have a huge power because we do get dressed every single day. And with our wallet, we vote every single time we buy something. Then, because none of us goes around with an encyclopedia when we go shopping about what is the right fiber and what is not, or what is the right brand and what is not, the easiest solution is ask yourself every time you're about to buy something, will I wear it a minimum of 30 times? And if the answer is yes, buy it. But you will be surprised how many times the answer is no. So put it back and don't buy it and walk away.
Livia,
so that's a simple tool.
Thank you so much for that helpful consumer habits. Thank you very much, Livia Firth, for your time today.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.